Welcome to the Reindl Report, a podcast out of San Diego, California that rewrites the definition of mediocrity.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought.
So come along for the ride as Paul Reindl takes you through the world of sports with insight, interviews, and incredibly bad jokes.
It just seems like the people that are so butthurt about it.
Did you throw a butthurt out there?
Yeah, I said butthurt.
2005 calls. They want their turn back.
Yeah, walked right into that one.
Now, here's your host, Paul Reindl.
Well, hey there. Welcome to it, episode 36 of the Reindl Report. My name is Paul Reindl. Thanks for listening in. This is a San Diego-based podcast talking about a lot of sports. Sports. Mostly about San Diego sports, as well as, touch on what's going on out there across the country as well. But this is going to be a Chargers podcast. If you can't stand the Chargers, this might not be the podcast for you. I would love for you to still listen, but wouldn't hold it against you if right now you were changing your mind on your podcast subscription. I am going to be joined by a guest on the podcast. He's been on before. I work with him most days of the week. Kevin Acee. He has a talk show host. He's a talk show host at the Mighty 1090. I'm his producer. That's how we know each other. He's been a long-time columnist for the Union Tribune here in San Diego. And so we are going to break down the Charger season. We are going to put a bow on the 2016 season for the San Diego Chargers. We're going to leave relocation and Los Angeles and the stadium. We're going to leave all that aside, at least for the most part. And we're going to talk about the actual product on the field, because even though for a 5-11 team, not a good year at all, but there were some bright spots on this team. There were times where, even with a horrible record, this team kept everything interesting. This team competed, and they had you watching every game, and they're just going, it was just one play here or one play there, and who knows what could have happened. So really, it should be a fun podcast for Chargers fans. I want to welcome in my next guest and my first guest for 2017 here on the Reindl Report. First episode of the new year. He has been on the show before. You can read him in the San Diego Union Tribune, sports columnist Kevin Acee. You can listen to him on the radio at the Mighty 1090 from 6 to 9 every night. I've heard the show. It's not terrible. And you can follow him on Twitter at SDUT Kevin Acee. Kevin, how are we doing?
The producer of that show is really good.
It's like I said, it's not terrible. It's not terrible radio. How's the new year treating you, Kevin?
Fantastic. Really it is. I mean, you know what? It feels like a continuation of last year. So, the stadium, the Chargers stink, the whole thing. Honestly, it's unbelievable how similar 2016 was to 2015, and then of course here we are in 2017 talking about basically the same thing we were in January of 2016.
Now, Kevin, do you ever are you getting used to not having to cover football in January?
Oh, it is so, the playoffs are so fun. I mean, as someone who is in the media, you're not a fan of the team that you cover. It is so much fun though, because it's the whole win or you're done thing, and win and you go on and you're closer to that game, and anything can happen in the playoffs and all that. It's really exciting. So I do miss that, but I will never get used to in January. And actually, for the last couple Decembers, because the team's been terrible and the stadium's been on the forefront, I haven't covered football in the final month or so of the season, and then I automatically transition into relocation.
It happens. Not for a lot of teams.
I'm not sure of this, though, and I really should have done. Paul, we should do this. I should get my producer for Trending Now to work on this, maybe, if he ever did anything like this for me, like as, a gift or something. Has there ever been a team that is relocating? I'm sure there has. That is also looking for a coach. I'm sure there has. As a matter of fact, I think Bill Belichick got fired after the season in which the Browns played their final year in Cleveland. But anyway, it's just interesting that we've got all this uncertainty. I wouldn't say it's unprecedented. It's just very unusual.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, you don't hear, at least in the NFL, we haven't had relocation for a while. I mean, last year,
Right.
obviously, the Chargers have, been trying to get a stadium done for a better part of 14, 15 years now, but nothing really serious until just recently with the Rams moving. It's just not really something that happens too
No.
often. So when you combine, the searching for a new coach and all of that, I'd be surprised if it's happened any time in the last several decades.
Well, yeah, I think that maybe Belichick, and I'm not sure what the timing was, but I think he lost his job as the coach of the Browns after their last season there in Cleveland. But other than that, and like you said, that was 1996. The Rams and Raiders moved in 95. So it's not like it really happens a whole lot.
Right. Well, Kevin, hey, thanks for a few minutes here tonight. I think you're driving
Okay, I'll
home
talk
right
to you
now.
later, Paul.
Sounds good. That was Kevin Acee on Twitter at no, I'm kidding. Wanted to just kind of put a bow on the season because as you've written and as you've talked about on the radio, really the cloud over the Chargers just in general has been relocation. It's been stadium talk. And I feel like a lot of people they forget about what actually happened on the field. They really do. I mean, a lot of people are disenfranchised. They don't care anymore. They're upset, and that's totally fair. That's why for the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to kind of talk about what happened on the football field this season. And I'd love to have you just kind of put the Charger season in a nutshell. And I know there was injuries and there were coaching mistakes and the cloud of relocation. What kind of happened for you this year? And before I get your answer, I wanted to play a clip for you from the last time you were on this podcast back in September. We made some preseason predictions, and here is how it went down. I got the Chargers going 6-10. I got them as a slight improvement from 4-12, but not much. Where do you fall?
Well, yeah, I'm making a big jump. I got them at 10-6, and I just don't. Guys, to me, I know last year they were 4-12, but 7 wins is the baseline for Phillip Rivers, unless you had just the snowball effect of last year of injuries.
Now, Kevin, the reason
that was a double benefit for you because you came very close and it made me look like a total moron. So well done, Paul Reindl.
Yeah, so how about that? We were both wrong, but it was close enough where I could give you a ha-ha, I'm smarter than you moment. But you did say in that clip, unless a carryover from 2015 and a ton of injuries. That has to be how you wrap up the 2016 Charger season, right?
And in no way, because who really cares about my prediction? Predictions are silly. But I stand by that. I really do. I'll say this. I mean, this team give me Keenan Allen and give me a healthy Jason Verrett. Now, big ifs, right? Because Keenan Allen hasn't finished the season in 2 seasons, and Jason Verrett has never played 16 in his 3 years in the NFL. So those are big ifs. But give me those 2 guys, and I will say I'll have a fighting chance that this team is 10-6. So didn't happen. I'm not trying to make excuses, but I'm telling you, injuries were the number one thing for this team. It's an extremely talented team, absolutely. You asked me to encapsulate this season. Here's what stands out to me. Until the end of October, beginning of November, we were talking about a team that virtually everyone could agree was, quote-unquote, better than its record. Do you agree, Paul?
No, I absolutely agree with you. There was a stretch, and you and I have talked about this, where I think at 3 out of 4 games, they had a 99.9% chance to win that game. It was 1 in like 30 billion odds that if you play those 4 games, they would lose 3 out of 4 of them. And go figure, they did. But no, they were playing quality football. They just couldn't close out a game.
Right, and that's, wonderful fodder for what we're doing right here. And again, I'm not making excuses. I'm saying, that was the story of the season. This team's so much better than its record, right? Or could be. And it was realistic, and we weren't making a big stretch. And then the preponderance of injuries, they just piled up, and that was no longer the case. Like, you would never say that the Chargers were better than their record now at this point. Like, it got so bad that you forgot about the Kansas City loss in the opener, the Indianapolis loss, the Oakland loss, the New Orleans loss. Because I will tell you this, that if they'd won those 4 games I just talked about, and they went into Miami game in a driver's seat for like a wild card spot, right? I tell you, they weren't going to go to Cleveland and win, Paul. And they weren't going to beat Oakland, and they weren't going to beat Kansas City. They weren't going to make the playoffs, even if they somehow found a way to win, and that's because of the injuries, not because of Mike McCoy. And look, he needed to be fired, and I've been saying that for a long time. But it was the injuries were the story of this season, and it turned them into a 5-11 team. And no longer are we saying, oh, but they could have been better. No, they couldn't have.
Yeah, it really seemed like about halfway through the year, I would say, you kind of just saw that they had reached their peak potential given all of the injuries and the guys that they had. They were getting the most out of a lot of players, including guys like Dontrell Inman and Tyrell Williams. They were making the most out of what they could. It just wasn't enough, and given all the injuries, I don't know what more you could have expected from those guys.
Right, and it was 1-4 at the latest. I think maybe the Oakland loss where I said the season was over, and that might sound ridiculous, right, that I would say that at that point. But it was because, look, we already know who's out, Barrett, Teo, Woodhead, Allen. You're bound to lose more players, and they did. They're too far in the hole. Healthy, you might say, okay, season's not over. They just, had some bad luck or whatever. They were never going to come back from that 1-4. Didn't get fooled after they beat Denver. Didn't get fooled after they beat Atlanta. They dug themselves too big a hole for the injuries they had.
Sure, and I would, I choose my words carefully because I'm not suggesting in any way that the players that were out there on Sundays gave up or any sense of that, because this team played hard. But even after that 1-4 record where, yes, the season was over, but they were still competing, and they did compete throughout the year. I mean, look at that Atlanta game. They go on the road, and they steal one in overtime. That team was competing, and they were playing well. They just, you were absolutely right. They were not climbing out of that 1-4 hole, and it seemed like maybe halfway through the season, kind of getting into like week 12, not that the team's effort was slacking, but it was almost like they were just buying into their record. It seemed like it didn't seem like the same team, even despite the record. It just didn't seem like the same team in week 5 as in week 14.
Well, it wasn't the same team, and you're right. I mean, it's like that because there's players out there that a few of them didn't have any business being on an NFL field, and a few of them, or several of them, shouldn't have been playing as much as they were. So, yeah, it didn't look like the same team because it wasn't the same team, and it wasn't the Chargers. I mean, it just wasn't. It was terrible what they ended up being. And I'll tell you what, there's one game that I think I ended up during my, the picks that go in the paper going 8-8, which is just terrible. Normally, I would be like totally embarrassed, but this was such a weird season. But they're such a weird season that the only pick I really regret was the Cleveland game. And that's weird. Why would you say that? And of course they could have won that game, right? But I'm telling you, in hindsight, this team wasn't going to win again. They just were not good enough to beat another NFL team because of what they had become and in terms of personnel.
Absolutely agree. Talking with Kevin Acee, talk show host on the Mighty 1090, on Twitter at SDUT Kevin Acee. He also writes for some newspaper, the Union Tribune here in San Diego. Kevin, who impressed you the most this season on the Chargers team? There was a lot of guys that emerged, whether they were starters last year, whether you didn't even know their name last year, but guys that had to step up. I think there's a few people that could be, on this list, but who impressed you the most this season?
I'm going to forego Joey Bosa, even though that would be the first name that comes to my mind because of just, man, you miss 4 games. You don't know what's going to happen because sometimes those things just build on themselves, and a rookie never catches up. And this guy was NFL ready, almost like from the start, and then by the end of the season, you wouldn't know that this was his 12th NFL game. Joey Bosa, amazing. But he was a number 3 pick, right? Casey Hayward would perhaps be that person. Though he's not going to be my pick, but I'll give you my argument for Casey Hayward. Led the league in interceptions, was signed for 3 years and $15 million, which is an incredible bargain. It was supposed to be the number 3 corner. The guy who played in the slot ended up being not a shutdown corner. He's not one of the top 10 corners in the NFL, but damn, for the bargain that he was, man, absolutely a surprise and super impressive. My most impressive was Dontrell Inman because he was so much more than I thought he was. I thought he was just a guy, and he's not a number 1 receiver. Depending on the team he's on, he maybe is a number 2 receiver. I think he's a bona fide number 2 receiver. I do. The way that he gets open, he's not overly fast. Yes, he's tall, but he's not big. But the way he gets separation, the way he fights for the ball, and the way that he moves his body to be able to make catches that, some guys wouldn't make. And that is a reliable receiver, and he really did become, even more than Antonio Gates, Phillip Rivers' go-to guy. Now, he's not a number 1 guy. He's not. And he's still young and makes mistakes. So that's where Gates maybe had the edge on him, and he certainly is not Keenan Allen in terms of his abilities. But Dontrell Inman, who I thought was, 25 catch guy, that's what he was going to settle in to be. I think that he has got a fantastic future in this league.
Yeah, I certainly will not argue any of those choices. I think even Hunter Henry had a very impressive season as a rookie. For me, it's Melvin Gordon. That guy, based on what he did last year, coming in just 3 yards short of a 1,000-yard season for a good chunk of the season, was leading the league in touchdowns night and day compared to last season with not a whole lot. I mean, they didn't go and ship out last year's offensive line and bring in Dallas or anything like that. They brought in, a guy like a Matt Slauson, and the guy stayed a little bit more healthy this year. But for the most part, he wasn't, he wasn't running behind the wall of vending machines that Ezekiel Elliott's got over there in Dallas. And so I was incredibly impressed with him. And my question on Melvin Gordon to you is, can he win Comeback Player of the Year? And I don't mean, is he, did he put up good enough numbers? I mean, literally, is he qualified for that? Because Comeback Player of the Year, to me, it seems like it's a guy that's been in the league for a few years, gets hurt, has a down season, and then comes back and tears it up. Can they give him the Comeback Player of the Year, you think? And is there somebody that's more worthy of that award in the NFL?
I haven't really looked about who would be more worthy, but Melvin Gordon isn't going to win it. But I want to first compliment you because I was remiss, because I've said several times, and I've told Melvin, because I'm just that impressed by what he did in comparison to last year. You knew he had the talent. You wanted to believe he could. And why I would say that if people outside of the Chargers building knew what a mental mess Melvin Gordon was last year, they would consider him for Comeback Player of the Year. I'm telling you, anybody being honest in that building was worried going into training camp this year whether Melvin Gordon would ever be worthy of being a first-round pick, and was he going to really be a lead number 1 running back in the NFL, because it was a perilous time, because he got beat down emotionally and mentally last year. And so not only did he say, hey, screw that, I am still Melvin Gordon, then Danny Woodhead and Brandon Oliver get hurt, and he's got a pass block, and he did an adequate job of that, and he had to catch the ball, and he did a really good job of that. And so you are absolutely right. I mean, that's the Chargers' Comeback Player of the Year for sure.
Hey, Kevin, Phillip Rivers, not a great year for him. He led the NFL in
watch your mouth.
Sorry to offend you personally there. No, led the league in interceptions.
Yes.
And I mean, what happened here? Because look, a couple of games, more than one game, ended with a Phillip Rivers interception, and of course, Twitter just goes on fire after that. And look, I'm watching that game, and I'm upset, but I'm saying, he's down 10 points with a minute and a half left. He's got to chuck it up there. He's got to make something happen. So you can't put it all on him. I forget which game it was.
But you can't exonerate him either.
Right, exactly. Right. You no. And then there was the game, the 4 interceptions against Miami in the fourth quarter. That one you can pretty much put solely on his shoulders, and I think he would even own up to that. But what happened this year for Phillip Rivers?
Well, first I'll say this, that there were, and this is off the top of my head, 5 interceptions at least, that he knew they had a decent shot at being intercepted, but he had to throw them, okay? He was under duress. It was 3rd and long or 4th and long or whatever down it was, but they were down by 2 scores, and there was a minute and a half left, and he was under duress, and the only way that they were going to do anything is if he put that ball up. There was the one in Carolina where he's running out of the end zone, and he's not only do they need to get 2 scores with time running out, he's going, if we punt this here from the back of our end zone, what's Drew Kaiser going to do? Okay? So he took a lot on himself, and that would be like 5 interceptions. Now, if he hadn't thrown those 5, he wouldn't have led the league in interceptions. However, you also still wouldn't have said he had a great year. So I just wanted to point that out in terms of the interceptions. It's like, okay, so he led the league. I'm telling you what, there's some quarterbacks that are worried about their stats who wouldn't have made the passes that he tried. He was interested in winning. I'll be honest with you. I don't know. I'm willing to say that Phillip Rivers was let down, the injuries, the offensive line. I'm willing to say that. But I'm trying to be completely objective, as big of a supporter as I am of Phillip Rivers, as much as I know about what he brings to this offense. I'm trying to say, hey, I got to take a look this offseason. I got to start talking to people around the league, and what did they really see out of Phillip Rivers? I can almost guarantee you that no matter what they say or what maybe I see again or what, Phillip says, that I'm going to say, I'll put my money on Phillip Rivers to come back next year and have a fantastic season. And that this was far more on the situation than it was on Phillip Rivers, say, losing his talents or something.
So Phillip will get comeback player of the year next year. Kevin, normally anybody answers a question of mine with, I don't know, they get kicked off and never invited back. But I think that really is a fair answer for that question because, I just don't know. But I think the injuries probably, as much as you hate to keep going back to the injuries, you telling me Keenan Allen and a healthy Danny Woodhead, who's an excellent catching receiving running back out there, in the passing game, telling me those wouldn't have helped open some things up, help free up Antonio Gates a little bit. I refuse to believe that wouldn't have made a positive impact in Phillip Rivers' season.
Whoa, there it is. I mean, without a doubt. And you throw in the offensive line, and look, Phillip got frustrated a few times, okay? And maybe he tried to force a few things. Absolutely, all right? But there's also some times where, there just was no chance. Okay, he could have handed it off. He could have checked down, and they could have moved the ball, and he wouldn't have thrown an interception, and they would have gone 3 and out and punted, or tried to try on 4th down and wouldn't have got it either. He needed to try to make something happen, and I'm actually flabbergasted by the haters. Is that the way to put it? I'm actually flabbergasted that people can't see that. It's almost mind-boggling to me that people can't see that that's what he was doing on some of those occasions.
Kevin, last thing on Rivers before I get to the defense, and then I'll let you go. By no means, look, I know I would never give you this title, but maybe people on Twitter might call you Phillip Rivers' personal publicist. I would never say that. So look, I am not suggesting at all that he's done or almost done, but the reality is the guy is getting up there in age.
35.
At what point do you think the Chargers are at all starting to at least think about life after Rivers? And, it's not a great draft class for quarterbacks this year. They're not going to go out and sign some free agent. They're not going to trade a number 2 draft pick for Jimmy Garoppolo or anything like that. But is that something that they're starting to think about? I mean, he's going to come back. I think it is a safe bet that he's going to bounce back next year. He's still an elite quarterback. But is it starting to get to that point where you start thinking about the future at the position?
This is going to probably be the first off season that I entertain that, as if they were to find someone 4th, 5th, 6th round, right? I don't know. Like you said, the draft class, the quarterback supposedly not very good at the top and not very deep. But I think we've seen in recent years that that's been proved wrong, or at least there's been 1 or 2 guys that have come out each year and ended up making a decent splash in the NFL when taken deeper in the draft. So if the Chargers, who will do their due diligence on the quarterbacks, if they find a guy that they feel like they can groom, and then I would say, you know what, go for it. He is 35. I would say yes. But is it imperative? No, because as we both said, we think that Philip Rivers is still an excellent quarterback and can be a championship quarterback. And this year would have gone much differently had he had even a semblance of the offense he was supposed to have. And so it's not an imperative. And these guys also know, because they're looking at the sophomore quarterbacks, that they'll know that maybe next year's draft is rich in quarterbacks, so they won't waste one. But Paul, it's a great question, because this might be the first time that I start asking that question in a serious manner as well.
Yeah, certainly no rush there, I would say. The only reason I would almost encourage them, Telesco would have to have a guy in mind, or a couple of guys in mind, and somebody late, like you said, 5th, 6th round, and he goes, that's our guy. If he's available, we'll take him. Otherwise, big deal. We're not going to take him at number 3rd round or 2nd round, anything like that. But I would love to see them get a guy while Rivers is still playing at a high level, so that he can be groomed and learn from, a great quarterback. And I think Philip Rivers would be a great mentor and a coach to a young quarterback like that, the young quarterback of the future, rather than we wait 3 years, all of a sudden Phil's 38, he gets hurt or something like that, and then we just got to throw somebody in there. We draft a guy that it's like, hey, the team's yours now. I'd love to see him be groomed and mentored as opposed to just thrown into the fire.
And that's the reason to start thinking about it, yes.
All right, Kevin, talking with Kevin Acee on Twitter, at SDUT Kevin Acee. On the defense, just a couple of guys I'd love to pick your brain on. Kind of just go briefly, a little rapid fire here. Joey Bosa, talked about him earlier, just an animal. I mean, for a guy missing the first 4 games, he put up some ridiculous statistics this year. Defensive Rookie of the Year, he's got to be that, right, for the NFL?
Well, especially when you said on our show in one of your updates on Thursday that he was the first rookie since Dwight Freeney in 2002 to win 2 Defensive Player of the Month awards, and this is a guy who missed the first month. 10.5 sacks. That is second all-time in Chargers history for a rookie. Just a fantastic year, and he finished strong. That'll be in the voters' minds. I think that he's Defensive Rookie of the Year. I can't say I've done a breakdown of that class, but if you're talking about a guy who was Rookie of the Month twice in a 4-month season,
Yeah, I'd say he's trending in a positive direction on that account. Brandon Mebane, what did he bring to the defensive line before his injury? We know that he was a leader off the field, and we know that he was a team captain, and he immediately garnered the respect of everybody, not just the young guys, but the veterans as well. Antonio Gates, who's nobody's been here longer than Antonio, and yet Brandon Mebane comes from a successful franchise in Seattle. He's been to the Super Bowl, he's won a Super Bowl, and he comes in and everybody is listening to every word that this guy said. But what did you see from him on the field before he got hurt?
It was very good, very good. I mean, that defensive line. It was almost like the last straw. I mean, he got hurt that game in Houston, I believe, and they won, and that was great, and all that, and it sort of kept them like somewhat on the fringe if everything went right in the playoff race. That was there was just, wasn't it their last win? Yes, it was. And so that was sort of I'm not saying that was why there was their last win, but not only did he take, reps there, but he was absolutely their best guy in the middle of the defensive line.
Yeah, it'll be fun to watch him and Joey Bosa, knock on wood, for a full season next year. Can't wait. Another guy that you mentioned earlier, Casey Hayward, won team MVP coming in as a free agent, led the team in interceptions, led the league in interceptions. Is he the best free agent signing for Tom Telesco's career?
If you factor in the money, which I believe is like $15.3 million for 3 years, $6 million guaranteed, he's already earned that. I mean, 7 interceptions, led the league, stepped up and played in a manner and in a position actually outside. It was a cornerback. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I think you definitely have to factor in the money. I mean, it's not like they went and spent $100 million and brought in Aaron Rodgers during free agency because, well, you paid him $100 million. You'd expect him to be good. But no, if you're getting a guy on a bargain, talk about some return on your investment.
Exactly. Now, he's not an all-pro, and he's not a shutdown corner. He is a guy who has a real good knowledge of the opposing offense, got himself a good knowledge of this defense, and has a nose for the ball. He's got good hands, and that's great. I really hope that they find another cornerback and that Jason Verrett can stay healthy, because if you put Hayward with Verrett and another good cornerback, that's a nice trio there.
Absolutely. Kevin, hey, thanks a lot for doing this, recapping the 2016 Chargers season. It was just bizarre. As bad as the team's record was, this was a team that, good God, could they keep games interesting? You could not turn the TV off. I know you were at all the games, but for somebody that only went to one game this year, I watched most of them on television, and I'm sitting here, I wouldn't watch 16 Browns games. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't put myself through that. This team, I will be the first to admit, I was laughing because they were finding new ways to lose, botched snaps or whatever you want to call it, but They kept things interesting for us this year, absolutely.
Well, especially before it got old. I think by the time that, you knew they were out of the playoffs, and then they, that Browns game was sort of thrilling at the end, except, it was Christmas Eve, and gosh, they were 5-10, or 5-9 at that point. But yeah, early on, it was spectacular. And I'm not saying I don't want to insult them and say that I relished it or took joy in it. But if you're looking for a good story and entertainment, the Chargers were absolutely the story of the first 2 months of the season.
Definitely. Kevin, my last thing then, and this is not turning into a relocation or a stadium podcast because we would need another 3 hours if we wanted to really dive into that. But I just wanted to see if you could, maybe in layman's terms, give us an update. There's a meeting going on next week in New York that, to my knowledge at least, wasn't originally scheduled. This hasn't been on the books for months and months. What does that meeting mean for San Diego and for the franchise and for the fans that are sitting here going, what the hell are they doing? We just want to know at this point.
Well, a bunch of owners, the members of the stadium and the finance committee, perhaps not every one of them, they might have some other obligations, but the bulk of the guys on those two very key committees are meeting in New York. And on the agenda, the only thing on the agenda that I'm aware of is to discuss the stadium situations in San Diego and Oakland, or you could say San Diego and Las Vegas, or, San Diego and L.A. and Las Vegas. And that's it. And I would say chief among those is they want to gauge and perhaps build momentum toward support for the Raiders to move to Las Vegas. And how does that play into San Diego? Well, if the Raiders are approved to go to Las Vegas, which will not happen this week here, that will happen at a later specially called meeting of all 32 owners. But if the Raiders are approved to move to Las Vegas, there's a hole in Los Angeles that remains open, and there is no urgency whatsoever for the Chargers to go. Now, could the Chargers still say they want to go? And technically they're allowed to? Sure, but that's not going to happen. Dean Spanos isn't going to do that as long as there's a chance that something can get done here, and as long as the NFL is continuing to work with him on ways to get something done in San Diego.
Right on. Good to know. We'll be following that story all next week, and for God knows how long after that. Kevin, hey, appreciate the time, man, and I'll talk to you soon.
Paulio, I'll see you later. Thanks for having me.
All right, good stuff, as always, out of Kevin Acee. I would expect nothing less. Columnist for the Union Tribune, talk show host on the Mighty 1090. I produce his radio show. That's how I know Kevin Acee. On Twitter, at SDUT Kevin Acee. Really good stuff there. A lot to unpack. It was fun to just kind of talk about the team and just recap the season and just, for the most part, at least, obviously they're at the end, but for the most part, leave relocation, leave Los Angeles, leave the stadium issues, leave that aside, and just talk about the season that the team had and what went wrong, what were some bright spots. Really appreciate it. And so that's going to wrap it up for me. Episode 36 of the Rhino Report in the books. We will talk to you next week. You can get all these podcasts on iTunes. We are on iTunes now. I don't know. I hate that I keep saying we. This podcast is on iTunes. You can go on iTunes on your phone, on your laptop, whatever. However you get iTunes and your podcast, you subscribe. Just type in the Rhino Report, and within just a few minutes of me hitting submit, you get that right to your phone. You can get set it up so that you get the push notifications if you really want to. And also you can go to the rhinoreport.blogspot.com. That's where I keep all my podcasts as well as interviews, full podcasts, etc., etc. And you can give me a follow on Twitter if you don't already at the Polar Bear SD. That's going to do it for me. I will talk to you guys next week. Thanks for listening in.